This evening, as you all know, it's the 25th Baltimore Sun Foreign Policy Panel. This council has a tremendous debt to the Baltimore Sun. Joe Stern is with us this evening. We're delighted. Joe chaired the first panel, and 10 or 15 afterwards for a long time, wonderful sessions. Joe was also very helpful in the founding of this council, and he currently serves on our board of trustees. And we're certainly grateful to Joe Stern, who you all know from his wonderful years as editor of the editorial page of the Sun. The council also thanks from years ago Mr. Perry Bolton, then a vice president of the Able Company, who was a chairman of our board of trustees. Donald Patterson, publisher of the Sun, also a chairman of this council, and Brad Jacobs, who was editor of the editorial page of the Evening Sun, who was a third Baltimore Sun chairman of this organization. So we're certainly in debt to them, and we're especially in debt for the Sun's personnel, its serious writers about foreign affairs, its overseas correspondents, including this evening's, who have joined us. Our chairman of the panel tonight is Robert Ruby, the foreign editor of the Sun, who you know from his work in the Sun, a longtime overseas student of foreign affairs. He's reported from the Middle East and from Europe, from as many as 30 countries, widely experienced, and we all have enjoyed his chairing of the panel over the past several years. Mr. Ruby will introduce his colleagues. Mr. Robert Ruby.
Thank you very much. Good evening, everyone. And on behalf of the Sun, and particularly on behalf of my colleagues here, I should say thank you for the 25 years, especially for Dr. Frank Bird, the council staff, and the people who have come to all of these programs. It's not a small pleasure for us. It's a very large pleasure to actually see and hear readers, including their complaints. But it's really very meaningful for us, so thank you all very much. We're talking about new instabilities tonight in various parts of the world, and I might include Washington as one of those parts. And I think we have a lot of instabilities because of what I would call the failure in a lot of places of Plan A. Plan A for Iraq back in 2003 was that Saddam Hussein would be quickly overthrown, security would be turned over to the remnants of the Iraqi police and army, that international troops would quickly arrive, and that most American forces would leave within a few months. There was no Plan B. We're going to find out at the end of this week whether the referendum on Iraq's new constitution will begin to put things right. My own opinion is that the odds of that working out are very long. For Israel and the Palestinian territories, Plan A for the United States was to support Ariel Sharon's proposal to withdraw unilaterally from the Gaza Strip. To the great credit of the Israeli government and also the Palestinian Authority, this actually happened very much according to plan. The parties have not agreed on what should come next. American diplomacy has not yet helped them develop a second step. I'm not sure that Sharon's government wants a next step, because it would involve deciding the future of the West Bank and of Jerusalem. I am sure that the government of Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority desperately needs a second step, or the future is going to belong to Hamas. We know that the American intelligence community's Plan A failed. September 11th was the proof of that. Plan B includes, so far, creation of the post of National Intelligence Director that Mr. Negroponte fills, more money, I'm not sure if it includes more expertise. That's going to be the subject tonight for my colleague, Siobhan Gorman. Russia had a plan A. The war in Chechnya was Russia's plan A for restoring stability to the Caucasus. Plan A was kill the insurgents. It hasn't worked. We haven't heard much about a plan B. Will Englund's going to talk to us a bit about that. And let me more formally introduce my colleagues. Many of you know Mark Matthews, a past Middle East correspondent for the paper, a longtime diplomatic correspondent. He's on leave from the paper right now. I am counting the days for him to come back. Siobhan Gorman covers intelligence and national security for The Sun. She previously reported for the National Journal, where she covered homeland security, intelligence, and justice. And Will Englund, for many years, reported with Kathy Lally from The Sun's Moscow bureau. He's associate editor of the paper's editorial page. And I'm going to call on Will to start us out, to talk about new instabilities in Russia, and perhaps with both Washington and Russia. Please.
Thank you very much. And it's a pleasure to be here. I just would like to start with a very quick aside. I recently returned to Baltimore from Germany, where I was watching the elections. And speaking of their instability and there being a plan A and not much of a plan B, the elections in Germany were supposed to determine the course of reform, not only in Germany, but in the European Union and in all of Western civilization in the 21st century. And that didn't happen. And there's muddling still today to try to figure out exactly how to arrange a coalition government under the Christian Democrats. And there will be no dramatic course of reform anytime very soon. I'd be very happy to go into that after the meeting if anybody wants to pursue it. On to Russia. Let me begin by talking about how far off base I've been. I think the last time I was here was about 3 years ago, and then and in editorials since then, I warned somewhat repeatedly and heatedly about the threat to Russia posed by fluctuations in the price of oil. I said that Russian economic reform, in fact, the viability of President Putin's dreams for the future of Russia, even his own survival as a political figure, all depended on the price of oil and what happened to it. This was all, I hasten to add, extremely accurate. What I didn't take into account was that the price of oil and the threat that it posed to Russia was on the downside. If the price of oil should drop by $10, Russia would be severely hurt because it's an exporter. Oil was running about $28 a barrel when I began harping on this theme, and as it closed today, it's $62 a barrel. Russia is awash with money, has practically, in Moscow in particular, more money than it knows what to do with, and that is a different sort of an issue. I think Robert captured the crisis in Chechnya, or the struggle, the conflict in Chechnya very succinctly. In 1994, Plan A was to subdue the rebels, and we're still working on that. Chechnya is a war that Russia can't win, and it certainly can't afford to lose, and so it continues. For quite some time, Russia was losing about 30 men a week, 30 soldiers a week in Chechnya, compared to the 10 to 20 of Americans who are killed in Iraq every week. More recently, the Russian numbers have been coming down somewhat to the point that the two conflicts have reached relative parity. On another question of plan A's without there being a plan B, I would like to talk about the Bush administration and its policy toward Russia, which I've been particularly interested to watch evolve. In his first term, and particularly after September 11th, President Bush and his aides pretended in public that Russia was a reliable and stalwart ally of the United States in the global war on terror. And under the rubric of this notion about Russia, the U.S. was pursuing three separate policies. One of them was to implant American military in bases along Russia's southern flank, in particular in Central Asia, and most provocatively in Georgia, the gateway to the Caspian Sea and its oil fields, ostensibly to help the Georgians keep the Chechen rebels bottled up in their own little territory to prevent the spread of terrorism, ostensibly to be helping the Russians. But I'm not sure that the Russians really saw it that way. That was the first American policy. The second American policy was to do what it could, was for the U.S. to do what it could to ensure and encourage the free and untroubled flow of oil and natural gas from the Caspian, from Central Asia, and from Russia itself, onto world markets. If the oil and energy sources get onto world markets in a time of rising demand, the United States is happy. It doesn't matter where they go. The third American policy was the promotion of democracy and free markets in the former Soviet Union. Now, I do not believe that George Bush is a realist in the derogatory sense of that word. I think when he says he's in favor of democracy and free markets, he actually means it. The problem is that these three policies are inherently contradictory, to use a phrase that the president himself used last week in another context. And events have caused that contradiction to become more and more evident. Most particularly, we had the so-called Rose Revolution in Georgia, a democratic revolution, followed by the Orange Revolution in Ukraine. Russia was caught flat-footed in the Georgian case. In Ukraine, it vigorously and scandalously tried to intervene in the results and lost. This coincided nearly exactly with the beginning of, no, I want to get my years straight. Yes, the beginning of George Bush's second term. And I would say we have seen a somewhat remarkable transformation in that second term concerning relations with Russia. There has been a recognition that, I think, particularly under Secretary of State Condoleezza Rice, that there is a conflict, there is a tension among these three goals, and that Russia, slipping ever more quickly, or day by day, toward authoritarianism, is not perhaps the reliable and stalwart ally that we would like to have. It may well be that the assault by Putin's government on the large Russian oil firm Yukos and the jailing of the owner of Yukos had a particularly startling effect on a man like George Bush with his own oil business connections. He may have understood what was going on here. I think a very telling incident happened earlier this year when Uzbekistan, where the United States has had a base since shortly after 9/11, a country that has tried since 1991 to find a delicate course among Russia, China, and the United States, a country that has a vile regime, the sort of country that editorial writers like me love to use as a stick to hit the Bush administration with. If you're so angry at Saddam Hussein, what do you think about this guy Islam Karimov in Uzbekistan, who jails all his opponents, who turns Democrats into Islamic jihadists out of desperation and frustration, and who, according to the one-time British ambassador to Uzbekistan, boils his opponents alive, some of them. Uzbekistan asked the United States to pull its air base, out of the country. And the United States, somewhat to my own surprise, said, fine, see you later. I think we have to recognize that we're entering into a new period of relations between Washington and Moscow, one that appears to have a much healthier dose of realism on the part of Washington. The next big blow-up is going to come in Belarus. It's also a miserably governed country. Elections are scheduled there for this winter. President Putin has always been able to point to Belarus and say, well, at least we're not like they are. If some sort of democratic revolution happened in Belarus, and I'm be the first to admit that in Ukraine and Georgia, those revolutions have already been taken on a certain amount of tarnish. But if there is an overturning of the government of Alexander Lukashenko in Belarus, something akin to a democratic revolution, maybe George Soros would lend a hand, that would be a disaster, a personal disaster for President Putin. So the question I would put out to everyone here tonight, or the request I guess I would make, is that we need to keep an eye on what Washington is going to do. We can say farewell to Uzbekistan, see you later, we don't need you. We can't really quite say that to Russia. A rupture with Russia would seem really to be in no one's interest. We've junked Plan A. Is there a Plan B? How do you deal with a country that has a rather unpalatable system of governance, lots and lots and lots of money, a very strategic position in the world? It'll be interesting to see if the Bush administration can reach deep down and pull out of the well some realistic approach to a knotty problem like that. Thank you.
And Siobhan Gorman, please tell us that the American intelligence community has a Plan B, C, D, E, and we'd like to know all the details.
Yeah. Well, Plan B was actually, I think, find a plan, which is maybe a good place to start. So we're sort of moving into the instability in Washington phase of the program, I think, and the intelligence arena is an ever-evolving plan, shall we say. The Bush administration, I'm not sure that they had given a lot of thought to the planning process within intelligence really prior to 9/11. It just wasn't really a focal point. They had the CIA director who had been, carried over from the Clinton administration, and things were kind of going along there, and they had their mind on lots of other things. So now, after 9/11 and after the Iraq intelligence failures, the White House has really been pushed into coming up with a Plan B, and we're watching it evolve now. It's been going on for about 6 months since the Director of National Intelligence started his job in April. And intelligence has really kind of come slowly to this administration, actually. And right now, the Director of National Intelligence program is something that really has been in the work for at least a decade, if not decades. And this White House and previous White Houses have really been resistant to the idea of bringing together all 15 intelligence agencies under one umbrella and one sort of person in charge, primarily because this hasn't been an attractive idea to the other agencies that would be affected, primarily the Pentagon and the CIA, and they had really been opposing that idea quite effectively since at least the fall of the Berlin Wall, which was when some of these discussions really got going on Capitol Hill. Really, I think that the theme that I've seen in the intelligence arena, and this actually stems off of terrorism in general, is that the easy solution, even though government reorganizations are not actually easy to do, and we're watching that happen over and over, but the easy solution, at least to put out there, is when in doubt, reorganize. And I think that what we may start to see, as we're starting to see really with the Department of Homeland Security, is that reorganization is something that is very visible, but there's really a lot more that needs to go along with it in terms of actually changing the business of government to really see any visible improvements in this particular case in the quality of intelligence. With any major government reorganization, management experts will tell you that it takes many years to find out if this organization is functioning as planned. But they will also tell you that if you're looking to change something like the intelligence community, say that you're trying to track terrorists instead of Russian spies, that you're probably going to need to do more than just pull 15 intelligence agencies under one guy and say, okay, salute, and go on. Right now, I think what we're watching is just sort of the very beginnings of John Negroponte, the former ambassador to Iraq, getting together with the former head of the National Security Agency, Michael Hayden, which you may be familiar with, particularly here, just because of the proximity of Baltimore to the National Security Agency. And they're really just starting to get things together. I mean, they are still trolling for office space. I think they finally decided that they're going to relocate from their current very cramped temporary quarters. I happened to be over there the other day, and they're really one on top of the other behind this very nondescript sort of blue metal door. You kind of go in, and there's at least, a dozen or so cubicles stacked on top of the other, and then at the very end, Negroponte and Hayden sort of have these offices with teeny tiny windows. So I mean, it's legitimate to say that you need to give them some time simply to get up and running and hire staff. At the same time, there is a certain amount of, I think, impatience, as I've talked with experts who have sat on advisory panels recommending these kinds of changes for a while, that they really feel that Negroponte probably has 6 months to a year to really show that this is making a difference. So as they move ahead, I think it probably is a little bit too early to give an assessment, but I will give you kind of my first impressions of what is going on. And I had the opportunity to talk with General Hayden last week, and so my comments are going to be informed by that a little bit. I do want to start by giving a little bit of background on how the Director of National Intelligence came to be, and I hope this isn't repetitive for this crowd. But you might remember that after 9/11, really even a year or two after 9/11, the White House didn't have a lot of interest in comprehensively altering the way that our intelligence agencies do business. It was really a little more than a year ago, maybe a year and a half ago, when the 9/11 Commission hearings brought this issue to a fore, that they were sort of politically pushed to do this. And the dynamic was actually kind of similar to the dynamic that brought about the Department of Homeland Security, where there were outside forces that were really agitating for someone to do something. And what ended up happening in this case was that after Richard Clarke's book brought a lot of attention to what had and had not been happening in the Bush administration, but also the Clinton administration, that put a lot of pressure on the White House. And in fact, when Condoleezza Rice, then the National Security Advisor, testified shortly after Mr. Clarke, she actually allowed that the president would be open to new ideas in terms of intelligence restructuring. And up until that point, the president had been quite firm that everything was being done that could be done. And they had brought together something called the Terrorist Threat Integration Center, which was going to merge a number of analysts from different intelligence agencies. But that was about it. And the Department of Homeland Security was going to be assessing the terrorist threat, but it wasn't really clear how they were going to have the tools to do that. Meanwhile, the FBI was undergoing a reorganization as well. But again, it was still kind of on the fringes. So after the 9/11 Commission report came out a year ago, July, their sort of big, their top recommendation really was to create this Director of National Intelligence. And what ended up ensuing was a lot of energy kind of got behind the 9/11 Commission recommendations, and I think it was probably largely due to a number of the widows and family members of 9/11 victims who simply wouldn't let Washington just go away for vacation for August, and made Congress come back and listen to testimony and start really talking about these ideas. So what ended up happening, and the reasoning behind this Director of National Intelligence concept on the 9/11 Commission put forward, was that the Director of Central Intelligence job, which was something that was handed to the CIA director, was simply too big. That the idea that someone would be able to run 15 intelligence agencies while running the CIA and advising the president on intelligence matters was simply too big a job for one person. So they were going to keep the director of the CIA just as someone who was running the CIA, and then they were going to create this larger office that was going to oversee everything from the CIA to the Defense Intelligence Agency to the National Security Agency. And as Congress debated this issue last year, there were a few dynamics that were a little bit different that meant that change was more likely than it had been for the last decade, when periodically members of Congress would raise this idea, and that was that the head of the CIA had left, and there was this pressure around the 9/11 Commission, and there was also the presidential election that was going on, and that forced President Bush to take a position on this, because John Kerry came out and he said, well, I'm all for all of the 9/11 Commission recommendations. He did this a day after the report came out. I'm not sure how many of them he read, but what that did do was require the president to take a position, and to the surprise of many people, he actually did back the director of national intelligence position. So Congress debated this for a while, and the Pentagon sort of quietly opposed it from behind the scenes, and in the process did put a lot of pressure on members of Congress to weaken the authorities of this new director of national intelligence. But the position did actually come to be, and Bush signed it into law in December. But as I mentioned, the passage of this law did come at a cost, and what that means is the new director doesn't have the power to really compel the heads of other intelligence agencies to do anything that they don't already kind of want to do. He's charged with directing their budgets and weighing in on some key appointments, but he does not actually have the final say in sort of major intelligence or planning decisions made on the part of the CIA, NSA, FBI, or any of the other agencies if they don't want to. And they're kind of finding some creative ways around it that I'll get into in a minute. But in addition, just to sort of managing those different agencies, Negroponte has also installed himself as the president's top intelligence advisor. And this is a role that the CIA used to play but no longer does. The maneuver put him in a great position to have the ear of the president on a regular basis, but it isn't clear yet whether or not he's going to be able to do that and still have time left over to try to get these other intelligence agencies with some sort of program. And it's not even really clear that they have drawn up a complete program. I hear that there is a strategy that's in the works and being circulated among the different intelligence agencies, and it's something that Negroponte is going to announce in the fall. But it's not clear how much time they really have to think through that strategy, and perhaps more importantly, the implementation of the strategy. I will say that the people in the Director of National Intelligence Office are aware of the magnitude of their challenge. When I was talking with General Hayden, he told me that he believes that the single most important thing that he's going to be measured on is whether or not they can effectively get these agencies to start working together, sharing intelligence, planning together, doing all of the things that they didn't do that presumably led to the kinds of problems that we saw leading up to 9/11, or perhaps the poor analysis of Iraq intelligence around weapons of mass destruction. At the same time, when I asked General Hayden how long he was going to be in this job, he was kind of non-committal. So far it appears that they, while they've done a great job on the front of becoming the official intelligence advisor of the president, there are some indications that the natives are getting a little bit restless at the CIA and some of these other agencies. I'm told that the CIA was pushing back quite a bit when it came to just trying to figure out who was going to be the top spy manager. This was another proposal that the White House endorsed and asked Negroponte to move forward on, that there should be one person who was sort of managing the spying activities, whether it was at the Pentagon or at the CIA or at the FBI. And apparently the CIA was not really that enamored of the original proposals of the DNI, and they were pushing back quite a bit. And there are some people who think that the CIA sort of won out in that process and isn't really being corralled as well. I'm also told that the FBI is kind of fighting from behind the scenes. We've seen that in terms of the appointment process for their new intelligence bureau. The person who is heading it, may be a very capable person. He doesn't have a strong background in counterterrorism, and I was told by some folks who spent a long time working at the FBI that he's considered sort of a great defender of the FBI and sort of the old way of doing business. And so some people have suggested to me that some of the intelligence agencies are sort of putting leaders in a position to deal with the Director of National Intelligence in such a way that they can basically just sort of circumvent that authority. And I've heard of similar things going on at the Pentagon. In addition, Negroponte's team has a lot of really difficult issues on their plate, some of them that have to deal with organizational structures, but some of them that really just have to deal with how do you produce better intelligence and avoid the kinds of intelligence failures that we've seen before. The 9/11 and Iraq intelligence failures point to two really important problems. One, on 9/11 was a failure to link up the intelligence that we already had. And in the case of Iraq, it was actually just a failure to collect the right intelligence and analyze it in sort of an objective way. And at this point, it's not very clear from the Director of National Intelligence Office how it is that they are going to tackle those key problems. Like I mentioned, there is supposed to be a strategy that is coming out in this fall, and we may get some clarity around that. But sometimes, again, I think that Washington gets very focused on organizational issues and who's on top and power struggles and things like that, and you sort of lose sight of what the actual problem is. And I think that the key problem that the intelligence community is facing is a problem of quality control, both for spying and analysis, and that probably is what they should be focusing on maybe a little bit more than who's reporting to whom. As I was talking with General Hayden, my sense was that he does understand the hard work that lies ahead, whether it has to do with how you deal with recruitment, how you deal with training, how you deal with all these sort of not very sexy issues. But at the same time, I didn't get the sense that they fully thought through their plan either. So Plan B to be announced.
Mark Matthews, we had been talking a little bit about how the Americans had a pretty good Plan A for the Middle East. It was to support Sharon on the withdrawal from Gaza. I don't know what the heck Plan B is. I don't know if American diplomacy in general has a Plan B on how to do things better about Afghanistan, about Iraq, about the United States image abroad.
I think, Bob, first, excuse me for walking in late. Robert, I think we are seeing Plan B being played out. Sure. I think we're actually seeing Plan B being played out, and Plan B involves an answer to three questions that I don't think the Bush administration ever asked itself. What if unilateralism doesn't work? What if the whole premise of going to war is not borne out by the facts? And three, what if we get trapped in an Iraq quagmire? I'll take them in sort of reverse order. I think the Plan B for Iraq is to try to come up with some kind of respectable exit strategy. And the exit strategy that they're focusing on right at the moment is the adoption of an Iraqi constitution. And I brought with me some wording that provides a little bit of context. It deals with the guaranteed rights of Iraqis who were placed under arrest. Quote, "It is inadmissible to arrest a person, to stop him, to imprison him, or to search him, except in accordance with the rules of law." And the passage goes on to say, "The dignity of man is safeguarded. It is inadmissible to cause any physical or psychological harm." This is not from the most recent constitutional draft. This, in fact, is the Iraqi constitution that was adopted in the year 1990, when the same year that Saddam Hussein began his brutal invasion and occupation of Kuwait. The point of that is that constitutions in the Middle East may or may not be worth the paper that they are written on, and everything hinges on how serious the government is in carrying them out. There is a constitution in Syria that is very strong on the subject of freedom of speech. There's a freedom of the press clause in the Libyan constitution. Even Saudi Arabia has some guaranteed rights in its constitution. So placing a lot of emphasis on the Constitution will, I think, require the United States, if it's in fact serious, to remain in Iraq long enough to ensure that the terms of the Constitution are actually carried out. Now, on the second, or the middle question of what happens if the premises of the going to war are not borne out by the facts. I think the administration's strategy for the whole Middle East region, starting with Iraq, is to encourage the development of democracy. Everybody applauds this. With a few exceptions of people who worry about the consequences of radical Islamists getting into power through the ballot and then changing the rules or turning into repressive governments. That was the threat that loomed very large in Algeria towards the end of the last century, and the United States supported the Algerian government in cracking down on the Islamists and turning back the clock on democracy in that country. Throughout the Middle East, under pressure from the United States, we are seeing little bits of reform, from Bahrain to Morocco. What we're seeing is governments that are opening up their systems a little bit, allowing more civil society groups to organize and to speak in public, allowing some kind of opposition to take shape, and even so-called free elections, or elections that are free up to a point. And this is providing a certain amount of breathing space for the populations, and a certain amount of room for domestic public debate, and it may be the best that we can hope for right at the moment. I think Jordan even is trying to nurture a political opposition to the regime, although what we will never see, in the foreseeable future, is a regime in the Middle East that willingly gives up power through elections. I think that is a bit of a tall order. I think almost as a stroke of luck, Yasser Arafat died, and his replacement turns out to be relatively moderate, relatively democratic, and what we've seen among the Palestinians is a revival of what had existed there before, but that Arafat pretty much kept under wraps, which was a very strong and widespread desire for democracy among the Palestinians. Now, on the first question of what happens if unilateralism doesn't work, I think what we're seeing is the answer to that, which is that an administration with the Secretary of State playing a strong role for the first time in 5 years, deciding that it has to work in cooperation with other governments, even the French, which is perhaps the biggest surprise of the last couple of years. We've seen with the North Koreans that in fact China has performed quite a useful intermediary role between the United States and the North Koreans, getting both sides to back off from their entrenched positions and initial a deal. The Europeans are taking the lead in trying to get a deal to stop Iran from developing its nuclear weapons program. And it looks as though it's touch and go, but there was an interesting piece in the New York Times over the weekend that suggested that a lot of investors inside Iran are getting very nervous about the consequences of turning the Europeans totally against them. And they're starting to shift their money into Dubai, which could have economic consequences for Iran, and that may put pressure on them to at least suspend their nuclear program, if not give up the idea of nuclear weapons altogether. And in another example of where the Bush administration was pulled into cooperating with other countries by a stroke of luck, we had the French approaching Washington some months ago and proposing to collaborate in bringing pressure on Syria and trying to shore up the reformers in Lebanon and get the Syrian occupation forces out of Lebanon. The United States at first was not sure that the French were serious, but they pretty soon found out that in fact Chirac was quite determined to do this. All of this intensified after the assassination of Prime Minister Hariri in Lebanon, who was a very close friend of Chirac. Whether they were in business together or not, I'm not quite sure. There's a lot of rumors to that effect. But the end result is that the French have been just as strong as the United States in favor of putting pressure on Syria and getting the Syrians not only to move out of Lebanon from a military standpoint, but also from a intelligence standpoint. And we may see another shoe dropping, which is the collapse of Bashar Assad's regime. There are reports that the United States is looking around for some kind of a replacement for Bashar Assad. I don't think there's any pretense of going the democratic route in Damascus. But the reports are just sketchy at this point, and nobody really knows how solid Bashar Assad's regime is. So that is something to watch. I think as we saw during the first administration, the tendency towards unilateralism is probably so entrenched that they can't break free of it completely, and as a result, there is still no enthusiasm for treaties and very little enthusiasm for international organizations such as the United Nations. I'll end it there.
I'm going to ask a couple of questions to my colleagues, and I'm not exactly sure where people in the audience should come, but then we're certainly going to look forward to questions from the audience. Let me just ask a couple of quick things here. Siobhan, I may be extremely naive on this, but it sounds like the intelligence community is still in search of an adult, someone who will say, as you were pointing out, it's not about the organization chart. Ladies and gentlemen, we have incredibly important work to do, and let's not worry who has the biggest office. It just sounds like that's what's going on.
Well, what is intriguing to me is actually that it looks like we see with Negroponte and Hayden's organization some initial indications that they're kind of starting to take on the same role that the CIA director and his deputy had before, which then leaves open the question of what's the CIA director doing, but also it opens up the question of who is doing the adult supervision. And I think that I'm starting to hear more and more from, former spy types who still are in the mix and, advising and things like that, that there are increasing concerns that while we've had all this organizational tumult, there still really isn't anybody in charge. And when I talk with members of Congress about this, they're a little more circumspect because, well, they created the Director of National Intelligence. They kind of want to think that they found a solution that might work. But at the same time, I start hearing undertones of, well, it didn't go very well with the Department of Homeland Security. And there is some concern there that we may just be replicating the last problems, because the solution to the problem may not actually be a new organization. It may be that you need to do things differently. You need to figure out how to build a better spy. And it's not clear whose job that is right now.
And Will, when you were describing this sort of unexpectedly financially secure Russia, and I can certainly understand how it can be rather disconcerting for Washington, if you've just been promoted to the presidency of Russia, what are your what's on your to-do list? Is it Caucasus? Is it firmer hand in Belarus? Is it getting even more control of the economy? What's on your to-do list, Mr. President?
The first thing would be to replace everyone working in the Kremlin with my friends. And assuming I succeeded at that job, I could move on to something else. As I said, most of Russia is awash in money. Most of it, though, is in Moscow, where rents are sky high, restaurants are opening on every corner, charging astonishingly high prices, money just all over the place. But you're not going to see too much of that in the countryside. A Russian patriot, if I might use that word, would want to see intelligent investment in the rest of Russia to bring the standard of living in that country up to, something approaching the aspirations that Russia has. It's a tough job. It's not something that the Russians have ever been particularly successful at, but without that, you're really toying with a very poisonous cynicism and despair is the wrong word because the Russians are so stoic, but just plain unhappiness and stubbornness on the part of the Russian people, with which you cannot really have a successful country striding into the future. And sure, I'd settle Chechnya somehow or other. I'm not sure how I'd begin to go about it, but there are tremendously difficult problems in doing anything about the war there, and I won't go into all of them. There are plenty of profiteers who are making a very good living off it, who would lobby very much and try to undermine any attempt to find a peaceful solution.
This includes profiteers within the Kremlin or within the sort of inner circle?
Mostly within the Russian army and security forces.
And Mark, if, as I've long advocated, you're promoted to Secretary of State, is there a way at this point for the United States to get meaningful international help with Iraq, whether it's in any form you'd like, development money, troops at this very late date? Is there anything a Secretary of State in the best of all possible worlds could do to make this less of a unilateral adventure?
Troops, I don't think there's any chance that more governments are going to send troops. I think it's an act of almost Russian stoicism on the part of Tony Blair that he's keeping British troops in Iraq. The best, and money doesn't seem to accomplish anything in Iraq. I mean, asking people for money is asking them just to light their dollars on fire. It just goes up in smoke and it doesn't accomplish anything. So I think they're left with seeking support from the region and support from the Arab League, some kind of cooperation from Iran, at least not to stir the pot up more than it's already stirred, to not to promote more Hezbollahs in southern Iraq, and getting some help from Turkey in the northern region, at least to avoid promoting any kind of unrest in Kirkuk or some of the other cities in northern Iraq. That, I think, is about the best they can hope for right at the moment.
The woman asked about a subject dear to my heart, which was the announcement last week that the Sun was going to be cutting the number of foreign bureaus from 5 to 3. She asked if it's true there are going to be no bureaus in Europe, none in Asia. This is not a happy topic for me. I spent a good part of my day today talking with the company's chief financial officer, which I frankly don't think foreign editors or national editors or metro editors should be spending their time on. And I mentioned to him that, I'm coming to this group tonight, and I know this topic is going to come up, and I kind of dread it. And he said, well, you should tell them the truth, which is the Sun is part of a publicly traded company. There are profit demands from Wall Street. There are internal profit demands. It's pretty relentless. And the one way of countering that, this is where I start, not the chief financial officer, is if people are unhappy about it, they really should call the editor of the paper. And anyone who wants to talk about that in more detail, we can talk after the program. It's something that, it's decisions that I don't think were made lightly. I deeply regret that they were made, and we'll see what the future brings. I'd be happy to talk about it after the session. Another question. Yes, sir. The question was about when it was directed to Mark about, in addition to talking about unilateralism, what role is the Karen Hughes effort, the sort of public diplomacy in the Middle East, what role is that playing? What are its prospects for accomplishing anything?
Karen Hughes went on what she called a listening tour. And as somebody wrote about Hillary Clinton of several years ago when she was starting to run for the Senate and made the obligatory trip to Israel, Karen Hughes got an earful everywhere she went about American policy, and she kind of turned it into a debate in some places, trying to make a case for American policy. I've seen quite negative reviews in a lot of the Middle Eastern press about her effort, but I think people at least gave her credit for making the trip, for setting up these meetings, for listening to people, and it was the beginning of some kind of a high-level dialogue, highly publicized dialogue that should probably have been going on long before.
The question was whether any of the people on the panel did not believe that events in Iraq would not lead to the splintering of the country, and what consequences that might have. And let me start with Siobhan.
I don't know if I'm in the best position to say how it's all going to go, but it does seem like the current indications really are toward, at the very best, some sort of federation of states. It seems like probably the best that we can hope for at this point. I'm sure that we're going to know a lot more after the elections, but it certainly seems like there's a lot of identity, cultural identity issues that are coming into play and seem to be overtaking a lot of the situation. But I imagine Mark has some more in-depth thoughts on that.
I don't know if it's going to pull apart. I mean, there's a reason why it's held together, and the reason was not just that they had a brutal dictator holding it together. That a lot of people in Iraq and in the surrounding region fear the consequences of seeing the country pull apart, and so. At the moment, this is one of the ways we're getting help from some of the Arab regimes in the area, particularly Saudi Arabia, and even Syria has been making noises in this direction. Is to try not to let that happen. If it were to happen, I think you would probably see. A good deal of tension between northern Iraq, the Kurdish area of Iraq, and Turkey, and Turkey once again being rather repressive towards its Kurdish minority, and that could very well stir up Kurds and the surrounding countries in Syria and Iran. You would see a kind of self-protective pulling together of southern Iraq and Iran, and you would see the Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Egypt, and Syria trying to shore up the Sunni minority in the center of Iraq, and it could all get quite messy indeed.
I'll just put in my 2 cents. Although Russia is the country that I care deeply about, I also happen to write the editorials in our newspaper about the war in Iraq. I think we'd be fooling ourselves if we didn't admit that Iraq is going to be blown to pieces. And I think this Constitution is sort of a roadmap to disintegration.
This is a special evening with the panel, which we've scheduled to end at 7:30, and I'm absolutely delighted that so many of you weren't moved by habit and took advantage of what I think has been an extraordinarily dense and informative evening with these 4 distinguished journalists. We thank them very much.